I've handled more than 1,000 cases as an estate attorney, and I researched the Larry King estate, and after that deep dive, here's my honest reaction. As an estate planning attorney, I can tell you, anytime I'm dealing with a blended family, the chance of an estate dispute in court just skyrockets. Before I get into that, let's talk about the background of Larry King himself. Here's a factoid for you. He was actually born Lawrence Harvey Zeiger, not Larry King. Larry King passed away on January 23rd of 2021 after being hospitalized for COVID. Larry King was amazing. During his career, he actually won 2 Peabodys, an Emmy Award, and conducted over 60,000 television interviews. He grew his first national audience way back in 1978 with his first coast-to-coast show, The Larry King Show. Then he expanded even further back in 1985 when he started The Larry King Live Show on CNN. He led that show all the way till 2010. And even after that, he was on all kinds of TV specials. He also appeared in Arthur, 30 Rock, Gravity Falls, Ghostbusters, and even the Bee Movie.
Don't forget, tomorrow night on The Larry King.
And on the personal side of things, he was actually married a total of 8 times, but only to 7 women, and that's because he remarried his 3rd wife. Larry had 5 children during his lifetime, and sadly, 2 of those children died just shortly after Larry died. Larry's last wife was Shawn King. Now, they had a bit of a rocky relationship there at the end. They filed for divorce in 2010, somewhat reconciled, and then filed again for divorce in 2019. And in fact, that 2019 divorce case was still open and pending when Larry died in 2021. So let's pause right there. As an estate planning attorney, I can tell you, anytime I'm dealing with a blended family, the chance of an estate dispute in court just skyrockets. In this case, we're dealing with a blended family because Shawn King was not the mother to Larry King Jr.
Who are you, Larry King?
And we know with a blended family, there's a much higher likelihood of there being an estate dispute. Think about that logically. Shawn King is not going to get involved with an estate dispute with her own children. She's not going to sue her own kids. But since Larry King Jr. wasn't her kid, it's game on. Larry King Jr. kicked off the party by filing a document in court purporting to be a valid last will and testament of his father, Larry King. This is a handwritten will that was done late in Larry King's life, at least allegedly. Predictably, here comes Shawn King saying there's no way that that's a valid will of her husband.
Objection.
I looked at this alleged handwritten will, and I'll tell you right off the bat, it is not a thing of beauty. Look at it for yourself. Let me point out a few things about this alleged will. First of all, notice how terrible the handwriting is. This terrible handwriting, as an attorney, it might tell me that the guy who allegedly wrote this will might have been mentally incapacitated. Maybe he didn't know what he was doing when he scrawled out these words on the page. Or maybe it's not even his handwriting at all. I mean, you would have to think a guy like Larry King, who's a renowned television guy, probably has pretty good penmanship, right? He wouldn't have this scribbly looking nonsense as his will, right? And to take that one step further, as an attorney, I'm thinking, well, if you have a high net worth celebrity news guy, he knows how to get attorneys. I mean, particularly Larry King, who had, 7 divorces during his lifetime? 8 divorces?
Larry!
This is a guy who knew how to go to a lawyer to have his will done. Why would he do it without going to an attorney? As an estate attorney, those are kind of the negatives that I see with whether or not that's really a valid last will and testament. But there are some positives to this alleged will. First, I gotta say, I compared the Larry King signature to other examples of Larry King's signature, and while I'll tell you, I am not a licensed handwriting expert, I've seen a lot of signatures as an estate attorney, and I can tell you the signature that appears on that document seems consistent with the other signatures of Larry King. Another positive that this document has going for it is that it actually has two witnesses. And in fact, one of those witnesses was his longtime close friend and television producer, Greg Christensen. So if Greg Christensen signed off on that will when Larry purportedly made it, I mean, that carries a lot of weight to me, especially because a guy like Greg Christensen isn't going to stick his neck out in litigation with a guy's surviving spouse. The only reason he would say, yeah, I signed that as a witness and I witnessed Larry King make out that document is because he really believes it. Why else would he stick his neck out like that? And also, just as an estate planning attorney, it kind of seems logical to me that this is a guy who would redo his will to cut out Sean, given that they actually had a divorce pending at the time and may have been largely estranged. I looked at some of the court documents that lay out the facts of how Sean King may have been treating Larry up until the time that he passed. Things like making Larry King stay in his guest house and maybe not taking care of all of his needs when he was physically not doing well. It kind of gives a motive for Larry to do a last minute DIY will because he wanted to make sure that someone like that didn't inherit from him.
Larry King?
Yeah.
And I looked at the dates. The date of that alleged last will and testament is just 2 months after the filing of that 2019 divorce. So again, that kind of goes to a motive of why he would do a new estate plan that would cut out that wife, because that was a marriage that wasn't doing so well at the time. Now, I showed you a copy of that will on the screen, but it might have been hard for you to read. In fact, it was hard for me to read. So let me just read out what that document allegedly states. It says, "This is my last will and testament. It should replace all previous writings. In the event of my death, any day after the above date, I want 100% of my funds to be divided equally among my children, Andy, Chaya, Larry Jr., Chance, and Cannon." Oh, and a quick side note. I keep calling this a handwritten will, but in the law, these are actually called holographic wills. So what we're dealing with here legally should be considered a holographic will. So since Larry King passed away a California resident, that would mean that California law would be applied to see whether or not this is a valid holographic will under the relevant code. Here, that's California Probate Code section 6111. And that California probate section really doesn't have many requirements. In other words, it's really easy to prove that a handwritten or holographic will is valid under that section of the law. It only requires that it be a will, and in this case, this document says last will and testament, so we kind of know that that's a will. It has to be signed by the will maker, and that appears to have been signed by Larry King, and it had to have been at least substantial. The substantial parts of that will had to have been handwritten by the will maker. And in this case, that is the allegation, that Larry actually wrote out all of the material terms of that holographic will. So I think if this case had gone to final trial, there's a really good chance that, as terrible as that document looked, that holographic will would have held up under that section of the California Code. But notice that I said if that went to trial, because this case actually didn't go to trial. Larry King Jr. and Sean King agreed to a settlement before this case got to trial. Settlements in this context are actually really common, and I can say that having handled so many estate cases after someone's passed away. As an estate attorney who's handled many estate disputes involving blended families, this kind of thing is so common that we actually dub them evil stepmom cases in our office. This just happens all the time, but the good news is that the vast majority of these evil stepmom cases do end up in settlement. And in so many cases, that's actually best for all parties involved. There was something else that I noticed that was interesting about this case, and that was when Larry King Jr. filed his petition to ask the court to find that this is a valid holographic will, he says that the estate was valued at just $2 million.
So that can't be right.
And if that wasn't weird enough, that that's such a low number, the surviving wife, Sean, files in and says, no, the estate was actually worth far less than that. She says it was worth more like $350,000. Now that really stands out to me. How could Larry King's estate, with this expansive career that he had and all of this network appearances and all of this stuff that he did, how could his estate be worth so little? Now, we can't actually answer that from the pleadings, but as somebody who's handled estate planning for high net worth individuals, I have an educated guess. My guess is that the reason that the on-paper value of the estate is so low is because Larry King had created one or more trusts. Now, those trusts would be able to hold assets of Larry King prior to his passing. And what that would mean is that when Larry King passed away, all of those assets that had been transferred into trusts would not be in Larry King's name when he passed away. So I did a little bit more digging, and TMZ actually reported that the true value of everything that Larry King had was more like $144 million when he passed away. So the $2 million or $350,000 that was allegedly in dispute here was sort of peanuts in the big picture. There are probably some trusts that dictate who's going to get the real bulk of that estate. So that begs the question, if Sean thought the value of the estate was only $350,000, then why did she fight so hard against Larry King Jr.? She alleges it was on principle, which is a common thing that's stated by these evil stepmoms. And I'm not saying that she is an evil stepmom. I'm sure Sean King is delightful. So after the Larry King Jr. and Sean King estate dispute was settled, does that mean that Sean King was all done with disputes involving Larry King's estate? Oh no. There's another lawsuit. In fact, recently, just October 6, 2022, Sean King filed another lawsuit against a whole bunch of people for many millions of dollars, alleging that she was defrauded in all kinds of different ways. Some of the people she sued included her own former attorneys, who were the joint attorneys of both herself and her husband, and she also sued Greg Christensen, who was that producer and longtime friend of Larry King. Sean alleges that these people colluded and defrauded her by siphoning away millions of dollars away from Sean out of Larry King's name. And this lawsuit is actually still going on today. It'll be really interesting to see how that case ends up, but already we have some interesting tidbits from that case. I pulled and reviewed Sean King's initial pleading in that case, and I can sort of give you the shortened version of what she's arguing. Basically, what she's saying is that when she was married with Larry King, all of the assets were community property. Now, California is a community property state, which means that when you're married, all of the assets that you own are presumptively jointly owned, or the community property. That's what it is. Community property means husband and wife property together. And what she's saying basically is, even if there were some assets that might have only had the name of Larry King, technically those accounts and those assets would have half belonged to her, since it was community property or joint property. So she might say it doesn't matter if a particular account only had Larry's name on it, it was half hers. And these people were not allowed to transfer away those assets from her without her permission. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that case ends up as well, because that is a much larger dollar value case. And by the way, it doesn't matter that they had filed for divorce. Until that divorce is final, it's still community property. So I think we're going to look at some things like whether or not there might have been a premarital or postmarital, like a postnup, that might govern the creation of community property. That's probably going to weigh into that case. And then the facts of whether or not there really was fraud and what she actually knew and what she should have known. Those are all facts that we don't know from her petition, but will probably be really interesting if that case does make it all the way to trial. There probably will be some confidential settlements, which is fairly typical in these estate cases. What's really interesting in this whole saga is that while there are some weirdnesses in the case, they're weirdnesses that aren't that weird. These evil stepmom cases are pretty common. These late in life wills are pretty common. Holographic wills or handwritten wills happen all the time. Disputes regarding community property after one spouse dies, those are pretty common as well. So while it might seem like there's a lot of weird and bizarre facts in this situation, actually the only weird thing in my mind here is that we're dealing with Larry King.